This is the Decision Point with Anand Nanduri. Anand, you are at the Senior Bowl right now. You are in Mobile, Alabama. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the buzz at the Senior Bowl. We're going to talk about Theo's new NFL Draft mock 2.0, where he has Shedeur Sanders, where he has Luther Burton. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about some of the free agents that are pending. It's already time to start tracking who are the free agents that we need to care about, moving teams, staying with those teams. If they do sign somewhere else, where do we want them to go? T. Higgins, Sam Darnold, all of those things. So we have a lot to talk about. And a Terminal Sarcasm already in the chat says, give us the buzz. And that's, I'm interested. I'm interested in hearing what the boots on the ground are saying. Who are people talking about? What did you see? Not that you're like an NFL scout or anything, but you talk to NFL scouts. Like, you're plugged in. So who are people interested in down there in Mobile?
Yeah, so, I mean, good to see you. It's been a long time. Probably long overdue. Shout out to the chat.
We needed to do a show.
It's been a minute. But, yeah, I'm out here in Mobile and got to see all of our old pals, player profiler guys across the board. And it was great to see everybody. But I think, the groups that are huge stock ups are all the tight ends. The tight ends that were here really impressed people. The interior offensive and defensive linemen have been really impressing people. This is not the draft to need a quarterback. It's real rough out there. But, the guys that, consistently have kind of made their moves up the board, the tight ends. Harold Fannin, I think, is more of a like a fullback, H-back type than he is a true tight end at the next level. You've got guys like Ferguson from Oregon who had a really strong showing. Mason Taylor from LSU had a really strong showing. This is just, again, you have your Tyler Warrens and such that aren't here. But the tight end position is back, and it's back in a big way. And a lot of teams, starting to switch over to 12 personnel. This is a great time to need a tight end because the draft will give you what the draft gives you, right? And this is a great year to need a tight end. Great year to need an interior lineman. Not a great year to need a number one wide receiver or a quarterback if you're past draft pick number 15 or so.
Yeah, quarterback is a tricky thing. So who do you think was the best two-way tight end? The best tight end that was like, say, 250, 255 that you think could play every down?
I think Mason Taylor was the guy that stood out to me the most as, he's kind of that true wide tight end. You don't need to take him off the field on rushing downs. You don't need to move him all over the place. He can hold up. And I mean, he was making play after play, kind of exactly what you'd look for in a, later, I guess, tight end pick, because you know how we feel about first round tight ends here. But he's kind of in that tight end 2, tight end 3 spot in this class. Obviously, you've got Warren, who's a freak, and nobody's Tyler Warren. But beyond that, I think he was the most impressive to me. I thought Ferguson from Oregon had a really strong showing as well. Jake Brenningstool, the kid from Clemson. There were a lot of really good tight end play here. A lot of guys that I thought played really well here. And some of them aren't going to play true wide tight end in the way that, traditionally tight ends have played. But I thought that group as a whole was really, really impressive.
So Tyler Warren first round. Anyone else in the first round?
I think you could see potentially a Mason Taylor crash that early second. First round capital for a tight end is tough to stomach after everybody just watched what happened with Kyle Pitts. And, we love first round draft capital in the fantasy lane.
Well, what about Dalton Kincaid?
Oh, man.
Where's my football?
Don't get me started on tight ends that don't block, Matt. Man, you have to take them off the field.
Usually I have a football, usually. I don't know where it is. We got to find my football.
Tight ends that have to come off the field on non-pass downs are not tight ends. They're giant slot wide receivers, and you have to look at them that way. That's what they are.
God, I would love to throw a football off my own face to do my Dalton Kincaid impression. That would be up there with my Tank Dell impression, right? My Tank Dell. Remember this? Remember the Tank Dell impression?
He's little. We may have the next Tank Dell. Speaking of which, Oregon, Tez Johnson, listed at 5'9". I don't know that I buy that he's 5'9" because I'm 5'10", and I stood next to him. But they listed him at 156, which, again, NFL wide receivers are rarely 156 pounds that succeed. But in this kind of setting, and obviously you've been down to the Senior Bowl before, in an exhibition setting, a guy like that that's just that electric, that has that quickness, is going to look really, really good in one-on-one drills. And he did. To his credit, he impressed all 3 days. And, I think he saw his stock move up quite a bit. But again, somebody's going to have to press the button on a 5'9", 156-pound wide receiver. So it's kind of on him and Dylan Gabriel to kind of shatter the size ideas. I mean, they looked very good together. Obviously, they played together at Oregon. But, a 5'10", 5'11" quarterback and a 5'9" wide receiver that weigh a combined, 156 and 195-ish pounds. You're betting on outliers here, and that's kind of the theme of this Senior Bowl. Is if you're looking for position players and if you're looking for quarterback and or wide receiver, you're kind of looking for guys that either underperformed a little bit in college that can break out at the next level, or guys that have size, speed, height concerns. There aren't a whole lot of slam dunks here, though I thought Tez Johnson really impressed.
We have all the data, and it's horrible. Absolutely horrible for small receivers. If you're talking about a guy named Gabriel, he's probably going to be Taylor Gabriel at the next level. That's what it usually is, right? That's what you should be prepared for. And I fell for it. I fell for the banana in the tailpipe with Tank Dell. I was like, I'm not drafting him. He's tiny. I'm not doing it. In Dynasty, didn't have any Tank Dell. And then he had a really impressive rookie year. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this guy, he was really impressive at the Senior Bowl, had everyone on skates. It was like a clinic. Like, he was more impressive. It's hard to get your head around, but he was more impressive at the Senior Bowl than Puka Nacua. He was more impressive at the Senior Bowl than Jaden Reed. And yes, he was even more impressive at the Senior Bowl than Jonathan Mingo. I can't believe it. But he was. No, he was. Jonathan Mingo, hilarious. If you went to that's why I love the Senior Bowl, because if you go to the Senior Bowl, Jonathan Mingo can't separate against the non-elite corners in the class. I mean, Julius Brents was in that particular Senior Bowl, and he was really impressive. But most of the best cornerbacks all come out after their junior year. They're just not at the Senior Bowl for that reason. And if he can't separate against these guys, then how is he going to separate against NFL corners? It didn't make sense. It made no sense to me, the buzz around Jonathan Mingo coming out, and then sure enough, he washes out. Now he's not even on the Panthers. They gave up on him fast. They gave up on Jonathan Mingo faster than they gave up on Terrace Marshall. That was a phenomenal Senior Bowl to be at. The quarterbacks were dreadful. Tyson Bagent was the best quarterback at that Senior Bowl. But the position players, we're talking about Rashee Rice. We're talking about Tajay Spears. We're talking about Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, Puka Nacua, Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, Jaden Reed. The list goes on and on and on from that. And one of the great performers at that Senior Bowl was Michael Wilson, who was a starting receiver in the league. A lot of wide receivers from that class were starting in the NFL just last year. And then the other Senior Bowl I went to was in 2020. That was Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts, just a few decent. Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk was there. He didn't play, but he was there to be interviewed and there to talk to people. There was a great rookie year from a player in that class named Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool was in that. Adam Troutman, I was in that class. Antonio Gibson. So there is a player who converted from wide receiver to running back that was at the Senior Bowl, and Theo was tweeting about him. Okay, Brashard Smith. Mm-hmm. So let's put this up on the screen here. Theo tweeting about Brashard Smith. The last two notable wide receivers to convert to running back were Antonio Gibson and Tyrone Tracy. So what did you hear about Brashard Smith while you were there?
Yeah, I mean, we spent some time around him and got to see him in person. It doesn't look like the transition's been that tough for him, which is great news for us as fantasy guys because, shout out to Theo. The last two worked out really, really well. Obviously, this one is also landing spot dependent as the other two were. But, if we get him in a relatively high volume offense where he gets utilized kind of in the way that the last two were in Gibson and in Tracy, I think we could see him really rise up boards as a dynasty guy. I don't know that you're ever going to get RB1 seasons out of him, but there are plenty of productive players that are never RB1s. So I think he's probably more likely among those than he is, your Ashton Jeantys of the world that are going to take the world by storm and be dynasty RB4 by tomorrow. But I think he can be a very productive player at the next level, especially if you fit him in the right offense and give him the right role.
This is what we're talking about. We're talking about day 2, day 3 players who, if they find themselves in the right offense, if things work out, okay. So this is one guy. There's Tez Johnson's one guy. Anyone else? Anyone else? It's a skill position player that was getting buzz, moving up boards. Again, maybe not first round, but into day 2.
Yeah, Jack Besh, the wide receiver from TCU. Just great 3 days for him. He came to LSU, and I believe they made him a tight end. I don't know if he was a recruit as a tight end or not, but they made him a tight end. He ended up at TCU, he's been awesome all 3 days. Corners have had a tough time with him. He's made contested crazy catches. You've seen body contortion, basically everything that you'd want to see out of a number 2 receiver because, again, a lot of the guys that are actually here aren't going to end up as number 1s. It's just not realistic based on, how late in the season college football goes now. But you're seeing it on the screen, right? Shout out to Trevor Sikkema. But you're looking at all of these reps that Jack put together this week, and they're against really good corners. The DBs here were consistently winning battles against the wide receivers. Another great year if you need a safety or a corner. Not so much if you need wide receiver depth. So, we're kind of grabbing at what we can here. But I thought he had a really, really impressive week here. And, if he tops that off in the game as well, which, again, a lot of these guys will opt out of the actual Senior Bowl itself after the practices. We saw several do that last year and the year before. I think if he plays in that game, and especially if he plays well, national audience, I think that may move him up, maybe potentially even into round 2.
Jamie asks, David Johnson, was he a wide receiver in college who turned to a running back? I don't believe so. I think David Johnson, I believe he went to Iowa State, and he was a running back at Iowa State, if I remember correctly. But I think he was a wide receiver in high school. So I think
that sounds right.
I think that's right. Let me know in the chat if I'm misguided here, but I believe that David Johnson was a wide receiver, at least in high school. He certainly had that skill set coming out. It was also 220. So that's the nice thing. It's if the guy has like the size of an Antonio Gibson, you can basically write it down that he's going to have a nice year in the NFL, at least one good season. Remember, Antonio Gibson, multiple double-digit touchdown seasons in the NFL, and he is not dead yet. Any other running backs that you want to talk about that impressed even a little bit? We're looking for anything.
Yeah. There were flashes from Trevor Etienne. Obviously, his brother is well known. But to me, I think the guy that kind of is flying under the radar a bit, Bashal Tutin, the running back from Virginia Tech. There is some Kamani Vidal-esque-ness to him, where if he finds the right role in an NFL offense, I think you can see the electricity and just how much fun he can be individually as a player. But, again, like we're talking about with a lot of these Senior Bowl guys, they're guys that need to fit a role They're not just plug and play. This is an RB1. This is a wide receiver 2. This is a tight end 1 for the most part, with the exception of obviously like we talked about earlier. I think Mason Taylor can play tight end 1 for you for a rather productive team pretty early. But other than that, skill position players here, man, it was pretty tough. The defense was winning a lot of those battles.
So let's see. I'm looking for, Bashal Tootin highlights here. And I think we've got one. This is from November 11th. So make sure we flash one up on the screen here. Shout out to Dalton Miller on Twitter. So strong runner. So I'm guessing at the Senior Bowl, he was able to put some of these linebackers on their back because they're not allowed to fully tackle at full strength. They have to sort of just wrap up. And a running back like this is going to look particularly good in these Senior Bowl practices.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a couple of guys that I thought were interesting. Obviously, Damian Martinez, formerly from Oregon State, went to Miami. He got a lot of hype this week. He looked pretty good. I thought that Ollie Gordon, obviously big name from Oklahoma State. We kind of thought that he would come out last year. He didn't. I think that he might be one of those guys that with a big indie performance, the name value may drag him up boards again. It's kind of
wasn't that impressive at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, that's the thing. I thought that he looked good at times, but it's the pass pro, man. The pass pro looked rough. So
it is worth noting that a running back that had the worst Senior Bowl of all time just had an incredible fantasy season, Chase Brown. So it was very difficult for me to get all the way on board Chase Brown, and it was absolutely a Senior Bowl bias where I was like, just get a Bengals running back. Given their ADP and given the potency of this offense, you need to have exposure to a Bengals running back. So this was my way of getting a lot of Chase Brown without necessarily being all in on Chase Brown. It was just like, it's the perfect situation for a running back. Hold your nose, right? One guy is a plotter in Zach Moss. The other guy, as far as I can tell, is an incompetent running back, but he's who's there. So, and he's electric. He has great athleticism metrics. Go to Player Profiler. You can see this guy has the raw material, but can he take that raw material and translate that into every down snaps in the NFL? And he did that. He was blowing every pass pro assignment at the Senior Bowl. He was fumbling when no one was even tackling him. Ask anybody. He was dropping passes, not even like wheel routes, just straight up, swing passes right on the turf. It was like, wait, this guy can't play football. That was what literally 100 out of 100 people said that went to Mobile, is Chase Brown can't play football. And then all of a sudden, he's playing some football this year, right? He was the 0 RB hero that we needed. So, however Ollie Gordon looked is not what he's going to be in the NFL, but at the time, Chase Brown wasn't a big name, right? Yes, he was very productive, prolific year at Illinois, but not coming in with big brand equity necessarily. Ollie Gordon, expectations are high, and so for a guy where their expectations are high to fall flat, it's a little bit different. A guy that could have came out early and didn't. It's a little different. He reminds me of Chuba Hubbard. That if it hits, it might take a couple years, but it's also possible that it just, like, he's Zach Evans. We don't know. We don't know what he's going to be. Is he going to be Zach Evans? Is he going to be Chuba Hubbard? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll give you another name. Jarquez Hunter, the running back from Auburn, had a few really, really big flash moments. But again, all of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt, right? One of the things that we talk about here a lot is we like smaller school offensive and defensive linemen that haven't had the chance to have, Power 5 strength and conditioning programs, NFL level talent around them to see what they are. And a guy, great example of this, Marshall edge rusher Mike Green. He had, Josh Connerly, the offensive tackle, who will be a first-round pick from Oregon, and just planted him. It was the highlight that circulated everywhere yesterday. And it was just proof, right, that some of these guys just need the stage and the opportunity to show you what they can do. But again, this is a 3-day sample size with one game at the end of it. And it's not everything. The combine isn't everything. This isn't everything. Their season-long tape from this year and years prior are much bigger parts of that evaluation than any of the spandex stuff that's going on here or that will go on in Indy. But they are important points because you're getting to measure players side by side that haven't been measured side by side with other players of their caliber before. And so I think a lot of the smaller school guys that get the chance to come to a Senior Bowl or a Shrine Bowl get a chance to get their name up there. We saw it with Quinn Miners a couple of years ago, where Cody Mock, all of these guys where you get the chance to kind of see them up close, and you're like, wow, he can really play. It's not just he's dominating inferior competition. Now he's dominating competition that we think is, day 2 worthy, or potentially some of them even day 1 worthy. And so I think, it's important to remember that this is just a piece of the total evaluation. And obviously all of you guys are being flooded with content from the Senior Bowl. It's an awesome event. And if you ever get the chance to come out here and check it out for yourself, you absolutely should. But it's just another piece of the evaluation. It's not everything, like Matt said, referencing Ollie Gordon and his pass pro issues this week. But it is a really fun event to be at, and it is really, really cool to get the access that we got. Shout out to Jason Allwine, who's been doing all of the things for us this week and kind of getting all the fun clips for us over here at Player Profiler.
Now we go to the Senior Bowl website, go to the offensive lineman. So let's talk about this. This is where the value is going to be mined, especially from small schools. So now with the national team, Gray Zabel. Okay. How did he look?
Oh, yeah. That's the guy.
That's the guy. North Dakota State,
That's
right?
That's the guy. You want North Dakota State, for a lot of the ball knowers, is one of the best, if not the best, FCS program in the country. 1AA, whatever you want to call it. He was unbelievable.
Okay.
All 3 days. Held his own. There's no question there whatsoever that he belongs up a level. He probably could have easily been one of the best linemen at the FBS level this year, based on what we saw the last 3 days. So draft and forget. This is one of those, if you didn't get an invite to this kind of event, you're probably a day 3, maybe even a late day 2 guy based on film, if somebody really spends the time to find you. But now you do this to guys here, and now you move pretty high into day 2.
If I'm an NFL GM, this is where I'm headed. When I go to the Senior Bowl, I go straight to the offensive line drills. Where are the linemen? This is where I want to be. That's the kind of guy I want to look at. I want to look at Clay Webb. I want to get a good look at Jacob Bayer. I want to get a good look at Jackson Slater. This is where the value is. Carson Vinson. Carson's is where it is. I can guarantee you multiple names that I just listed, you're going to see great value from them. You're going to see plays being made in the NFL playoffs and the announcers talking about how late that player slipped in the NFL draft because he went to a small school.
Yeah, and this is the kind of event that you can get a side-by-side for him. Because if you're looking at, any of these guys in Alabama, A&M, and North Dakota State, we had this issue, even though I think offensive line versus quarterback is very different, we had this issue with Josh Allen. We didn't see him play with a cast that was capable of competing with an FBS team. We saw him play FBS teams and look really bad. But we didn't see him have, equated talent. And that's one of the biggest things about once you get to the NFL level. That's why I think it's so impressive to see what a Jaden Daniels has done this year in Washington, right? It is so hard to mentally process and take in the speed at which the NFL game goes relative to even the college game. Because you talk to guys out here and they're like, wow, everyone here is really good. Yeah. And everyone here is fighting for roster spots in the NFL, whereas you have established all pros. Your you're a tackle, you're green behind the ears, and you went to North Dakota State or you went to Sacramento State or Alabama A&M. And suddenly that's Myles Garrett. That's TJ Watt. There is no adjustment period for you. If you have to go out there day one and play, these are NFL edge rushers. They're all pros, and they're coming at you. This is trial by fire, whatever you want to call it. But, when you get to a spot like this, you can kind of see what makes some of these guys special. I think Miners is probably the best example where you saw his journey in trying to become just the body type where you can even learn to be an NFL offensive lineman. And then to get where he's gotten and now to be one of the better O linemen in the league is just a testament to one, if you have the right scouting department, if you're hiring the right people that are coming to events like this, that are evaluating talent, leaving there saying, hey, you have to draft this guy. Even if it's in the third round, even if it's a round earlier than you want to, what he can turn into is so much different than what, an Alabama offensive lineman or an Ohio State offensive lineman can turn into, because they've had NFL level strength and conditioning programs, NFL level nutrition for years and years and years already. Whereas a lot of these guys that you see here that, put together clips like Mike Green did yesterday, they're diamonds in the rough that still have more to them than even what their coaches at the college level have gotten out of them. So I think, again, shout out to the Senior Bowl and all the access that they give us to be able to come out and do this. But it's really alarming to see some of these really, really, really premier FBS, championship caliber offensive tackles get put on their ass by MAC guys like Mike Green. But it's also awesome, and we love to see that.
Interior defensive line, interior offensive line. That's the best place to find value from Senior Bowl prospects. Now, our own Theo Gremminger has just published on playerprofiler.com. Go to playerprofiler.com. Go to the fantasy section. Go to the articles section. Go to the NFL draft section. It's everywhere over there. His NFL draft mock 2.0 is now live. So let's take a look at this. So here's where Theo thinks these players are going. Just published this.
Shout out to Theo, by the way.
With the first pick in the NFL draft, Theo Gremminger believes the Tennessee Titans will select Cam Ward, quarterback, Miami. What do you think about that?
I think he's going to get a general manager fired.
No
That's my opinion of Cam Ward right now, because where he's getting drafted, they're going to try to play him too early. And I think he's probably 12 to 18 months away. There's a lot to like about the physical talent. There's a lot to like about what he can do out of structure. But you are basically starting from zero in terms of playing NFL QB here. There's a lot to like about him. There will be comps made to supremely athletic quarterbacks that we've had come into the draft before. But to me, he is the most volatile of all of the prospects that will probably go in the first round.
So we're looking down the board. Abdul Carter at 2 to Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders
Home run.
at 3 to the Giants. So if you're Tennessee, you think they should just go Abdul Carter and not worry about it? Just
yeah.
You take the best player available, build around your Myles Garrett, and then you can go shopping for a quarterback once you have more of the foundational pieces in place.
Yeah, if I'm Tennessee, to me, the best player in this draft in terms of NFL projection, I think Travis Hunter may be the most valuable in terms of he can cover multiple positions for you if you're deficient at both. But in terms of who I think is the best player at their individual position, I think it's Abdul Carter. And for me, if I'm Tennessee, I am not trying to plug square peg into round hole because I need quarterback. We've talked about this before. The worst time to draft a quarterback is when you desperately need one, and they desperately need one. Do not get red-pilled into taking Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward and thinking that they are any of the QBs from last year's class, because they would be QB7 and QB8 if we're just putting them side by side and adding them into the same class. Don't make the mistake.
So you think Bo Nix would be the 101 in this class?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
If you're going back in time, and if you can, just import Bo, knowing what we knew about him at the time, yeah, I do. I do think he would be the 101 here. To me,
without even seeing him in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a
Shedeur's,
real indictment of this class.
yeah,
And
it's
you know what
not
the
a great.
biggest indictment is? The biggest indictment, and this is because you know where my sensibilities are. If I'm rebuilding, I want to start with a franchise left tackle. If I'm the Patriots, I'm looking for where's the Penei Sewell in this class.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I'm looking. The first offensive lineman off the board per Theo Gremminger is Kelvin Banks from Texas at 13 to Miami. I love Miami getting the best offensive lineman in the class. I don't think there's any way that happens. There will be an offensive lineman that moves up. People need offensive line. It is the biggest need. It's the hardest position to fill. There are NFL teams at certain points in the season that are short a roster spot because there isn't a player that can play at the NFL level that is even available on the street to even suit up.
Yeah.
That's how hard it is to replace that position and why you need to be investing in that position heavily, especially when you're in rebuild mode, like if you're the Patriots, if you're the Giants. And it's a real bad sign for this class. This class has some nice defensive linemen, like great defensive line class, and not a lot else, right? We talk about this as a weak wide receiver class. It's a weak quarterback class. It's a weak offensive lineman class. And then where are the strengths? Oh, running back and D-line. That's awful. That is an awful sign if those are the premium positions in this draft class.
Yeah, tight ends obviously also, but you're looking down this list, right?
Exactly. Fringe positions that you're really trying to fill out and hit on players in day 2, day 3. When those are the positions that are the strongest, then that's the perfect time when you could consider trading out of the first round. Like every single team, all 32 that were listed here. I mean, have there been any trades? Is this all 32 teams? Is this all chalk?
I think it's just all 30. I think it's just chalk.
There haven't been any trades of first-round picks yet. That's got to be a record that we've gone this long without any movement. No forfeited picks, no traded picks, previously traded picks. NFL teams seem to really covet their first-rounders like never before.
And it's weird because last year's class, I would understand hoarding firsts. Last year's first round was awesome. This year, I think your value is between player 20 and player 60 on your big board. So if I'm an NFL team this year specifically, I'm trying to stockpile early seconds, late seconds, early thirds if I can as a priority, because I don't know that the difference between player 5 and player 20 is that massive in this class. Whereas the difference between player 20 and player 65, 70, if you've done your scouting well and if you've kind of assembled the right crew, I think you will probably get, if you have 4 picks between 20 and 60, I think 3 of those 4 will likely hit. If you have, solid scouting team and your GM understands how to build a roster, I think you're going to get 3 really productive players. Obviously, it's tough in a draft class, no matter how good we think it is at the time. Injuries happen, life happens. They're not all going to be 100% slam dunks like the good old New Orleans draft that everyone loves to reference from a few years ago. But I think when you look at kind of how each draft class comes together, last year's was really, really strong at the top. You saw all this action and teams trying to move up. There were rumors that Tennessee was going to move up for a quarterback. There were rumors that Atlanta was going to move up for a quarterback. There were rumors that everybody's moving up for a quarterback. Everybody's moving up for a tackle. Everybody's moving up for everything. This year, it kind of seems like everybody's content to stay where they are. And it's not that, a Travis Hunter or an Abdul Carter are not incredible football players. They are. It's just there are only 1 or 2 of them up at the top that are worth that. And it might be worth throwing 2 darts at between picks 25 and 80, so to speak, or 25 and 100 than it is throwing one dart at the top, because the physical traits that these guys have in that late first round grade and beyond are very similar to the guys that are at the top. They just don't have the polish or don't have the college production. And I think that's where, we talk about all the time how you want to find steals in the NFL draft. I think that's a great way to do it, is take a guy, Shamar Stewart's a great example here. He did not have crazy college production, but if you watch his film, he's a top 15 player, no question about it. And then he came here and kicked ass, and obviously, left yesterday after his great day yesterday. I think when you look at how all of this class comes together and how, you would put together your draft board in terms of what you want, it's a lot of interior linemen on both sides. It's a lot of tight ends. It's running backs. There's a wide receiver 2 here or there. There might be a quarterback that you like later on, in a Dylan Gabriel that's not an ideal size, or Riley Leonard that wasn't exactly a proficient passer, or Will Howard that was around the block for a while and only really put it all the way together in his final 4 games. Every position outside of the ones that we've listed, interior offensive, defensive line, tight end, running back, you're kind of searching for a trait that you like or something that you can develop as opposed to a finished player. And that's why I think you're going to see so much of the value, and the future Pro Bowlers, the future All Pros in this draft are probably going to come in that late first to second round as opposed to the first round, because we are set in our ways. And in a lot of ways, the guys that'll go at the top of the draft are the guys that we've heard about for years and years and years.
So 2 Ohio State players back-to-back. Theo has at Seattle, pick 18, Josh Simmons, tackle from Ohio State. Tampa at 19, Egbuka. Do you think Egbuka is a first-round pick? Does he deserve to be a first-round pick?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to someone last night about this. I think he is the baby between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Chris Olave. 2 really productive players.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's kind of the blend of the 2 of them. I'm not saying that he's better than, either of them at everything, but that's kind of what his play style is. Chris Godwin over there, the work that Theo did there with Chris Godwin, I think he's a perfect replacement.
He's a free agent. Chris Godwin's a free agent. We're going to talk about the free agents in a minute. Chris Godwin is a free agent, so this Egbuka pick makes a lot of sense. And put Jalen McMillan in the slot and just make this is like some of these fits. It's a lot of fun. Theo does a great job of just finding the perfect match. I mean, Tet McMillan, my favorite one is Tet McMillan to Las Vegas.
Oh yeah.
Las Vegas does not have a proper alpha receiver. They need Tet McMillan. He's just down the street at Arizona. It's so perfect, and you move Jacoby Myers into a possession receiver role. He doesn't have to be the lead target commander in that wide receiver room. And then you have Brock Bowers. I mean, it is perfect. You're not going to get a quarterback there that you're happy with, so forget quarterback. Don't trade up. Get Tet McMillan. Build the nest. You want to be a nesting GM. That's what I would be. I'd be a nesting GM where I'm going to build the nest. I'm going to bring all these pieces, feathers and twigs, everything. Maybe a piece of insulation off of a house. And I'm going to peck away, put it together. And then you bring in the egg, the quarterback at the end. And that's part of like the nesting that Las Vegas needs to do. Forget quarterback this year, Vegas, and go and Tet McMillan is perfect. But man, it's so interesting to go down the board and you see edge, D-line, edge, D-line. Wow, right? Wow. And Indianapolis getting Tyler Warren, according to Theo Gremminger. That feels right. That feels as right as rain. I mean, talk about figuring out the right player of a position of need at the right draft pick. I mean, you look at go to playerprofiler.com, look at this mock draft 2.0 from Theo Gremminger. You tell me you don't love most of these picks.
I want everybody. I hope at least you watched the college football playoffs. I'm obviously very biased about how those turned out. I was there at all those games. But I want you to go back and I want you to watch Tyler Warren against Ohio State. They left him on islands with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, one of them will probably be a late first-round pick. Both of them will probably be gone by pick 50, 55 at the latest. They trusted him to hold up by himself at times against them. That's the kind of blocker you're getting in addition to the pass catching that you're getting out of Tyler Warren. That is the kind of prospect at tight end that I think is worth the high draft capital, the first round pick, because you can functionally use him as a blocker and get your value. You can use him as a receiver and get your value, but you don't have to take him off the field ever. And that's the real value in having him. You have no idea what he's doing. He ran Wildcat quarterback for Penn State this year, for God's sake. Yeah, Andy, please, for the love of God, if he's there, push the button.
And this segment of the mock draft says it all. It says it all. By the way, Dynasty Dominator, the Dynasty Dominator ad happens to be there. Dynasty Dominator app. Go to the App Store. Get the Dynasty Dominator now. The 2025 rookie class is loaded. You can start to evaluate trades, including the new pick values. So we've updated the pick values for the 2025 draft picks. Unfortunately, if you are a big fan of this class, you're not going to be happy with the draft pick values. They have declined from last year because this is a very different class. And so you're just not going to get the same capital in return. But go ahead and plug in like, hey, what if I'm trying to trade for the 109? What is that worth? And this is the best trade analyzer for Dynasty trades on the market, the Dynasty Dominator app, and you can add the 2025 draft class to the app now. It's just $5. It's a great deal. Check it out in the App Store on Google Play. Theo has D-tackle from the Big Ten at pick 24 to Minnesota, Kenneth Grant. Then it's a reach wide receiver because it's a weak wide receiver class, though Alec Ayomanor is interesting. Right? That's how you pronounce his name?
I think it's Ayomanor. Yeah,
Ayomanor. And then you have Jahad Campbell, James Pierce, linebacker, edge rusher from the SEC. It's just this is the encapsulation of this draft right here. And I love the cleverness of thinking about the Houston roster. Stephon Diggs, free agent. Tank Dell, not going to play. Like we should do breaking news. I should break that. I should break that news right now. Actually, I don't know what I'm thinking. I shouldn't. How do I not break that? We gotta run the breaking news. Tank Dell won't be playing this year. You'll see him in 2026 as a degraded form of himself, and he will likely never make a difference for fantasy. And if you have him, I would try to throw him into any dynasty deal if you think he could in any way, shape, or form move the needle, because he relied on lateral quickness in order to win at the NFL, and this injury has robbed him of that. And if you don't have the requisite size to be able to handle these kinds of impacts, then your body is going to get contorted, and you are going to ultimately have to retire due to injury. That has been the end game of so many small receivers. I'm thinking of Andrew Hawkins. I can think of so many of these exciting players that if they just were if they had a little bit more BMI, if they had a little bit more center of gravity, if they had just a little bit more muscle mass to absorb some of these impacts, their careers could have gone much differently. But that's just there's a reason why when we were like mining the database, could not find a good comp for Tank Dell at his size. So Theo spot on once again with this speculation that the Texans don't have a lot of needs. But suddenly a team that was flush with talent at wide receiver had the highest ADP in fantasy football leagues at the wide receiver position of any team in the NFL. Houston Texans in 2024. Now this year, Theo's saying they got to go get a receiver. They need to restock.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. What do they have? And your Senior Bowl Bay, Mike Green, Theo has him going to Detroit at pick 28.
Oh, please. Oh, please let him play next to Aiden Hutchinson. That'd be so great.
Again,
oh, man, I would
it must
love
be
that
nice to
so
be
much.
Detroit and have very few needs. And you can just take best player available like Mike Green.
That's because Detroit did the thing that we always advocate that you do. Solve problems before they're problems. What are the toughest things that you have to figure out? You need a premier edge rusher. All right, well, they took Aiden Hutchinson because Jacksonville decided that Trayvon Walker was the guy.
Ugh.
Thank you, Jacksonville. We'll take Aiden Hutchinson, who probably, if he had been healthy this year, might have been the defensive player of the year. Okay, cool. Well, what else do we need? Well, we need all-pro offensive tackles. Well, Taylor Decker's a pretty good one. Let's go draft Penei Sewell in the top 6. He'll be all right here, I guess. And then we'll fill the middle of our line with just the meanest motherfuckers you've ever seen. So that now human statue Jared Goff is throwing for 4,500 yards a year against anybody and everybody, right? It's not like they lost to the Commanders because the offense sucked. Ben Johnson got 31 points out of an offense that turned the ball over 5 times. Do you understand how hard that is to do?
Brad Holmes is making a lot of people a lot of money that don't even play football. Think about that. And he's out here making luxury picks, drafting running backs in the first round. You don't even hate it.
Yeah. I mean, he took, who was it, Jack Campbell at linebacker in that same draft, and Jameer
had a luxury,
Gibbs
extra picks.
And the funniest part about that is the round 2 picks that year were better than the round 1 ones, and so it didn't matter.
Didn't matter. It didn't matter.
That's what great organizations do. They build an identity, and they understand that this is a trenches game and that quarterbacks matter, but only if you can keep them upright and only if you can impact the other teams. And look at where they are now. You have a guy like Mike Green that in most draft classes is probably a top 15 pick, but because he had a Marshall sticker on his helmet, you might get him at pick 28. I don't think he'll last that long in the real draft because I think he's going to blow up the combine too. But, I mean, if Detroit is able to get any of these premier edge players here at 28, and someone's going to be there, I don't know it'll quite be Mike Green good, but someone will be there at 28. And if you get someone to pair with Aiden Hutchinson and you kind of rebuild that defense and get a bunch of your guys back, again, the Lions bandwagon started with us, what was that, 4 years ago, maybe? And this is what we were talking about. If you're going to go through the rebuild, if you're going to do everything, your ownership, your GM, your head coach, your quarterback have to be totally aligned on the vision. People have to be okay with losing. You have to be okay with not being great for a while. You have to be totally committed to an identity. I think we know what the identity of the Lions is. That's how you rebuild. And the funniest part about it is the 2024 redux of the 2021 Lions is the Commanders. And look what they did. They built the defense. They built their O-line. They have a number 1 wide receiver, and then they drafted a quarterback.
That's right.
Look what happens.
They built a nice little nest. They built a nest for Jaden Daniels. That's right.
Awesome.
Hey, this year, you want to hear something
that's how you do it.
Crazy about this particular NFL draft? Crazy fact about this NFL draft. The New Orleans Saints and the LA Rams both have first-round picks.
That never happens.
I mean, what? That's so disorienting to see that. I can't believe it. It's unbelievable. But yes, you're right. The Lions are so set up. They're in the perfect spot in this draft to just take any defensive lineman or edge rusher that they want. There's also a pretty nice safety there at the end to strengthen the secondary. Eamon. So there's lots of options, lots of just the perfect shopping cart of choices there for the Lions in the back half of the first round. You have to love it. And they did it the right way. I love to envision, I was a football manager at Northwestern, and there's certain flashbacks that I have sometimes. And when I think about Hutchinson and Sewell, I think about some of these drills where I don't know how much they do this at the NFL level because the practice routines and the very different in the NFL than they are in college. But just to have the whole team crowded around these matchups of the number one edge rusher versus the left tackle, and to see those battles and everybody crowding around and everybody whooping and hollering, it's just inspiring. And if you think about it, like, yeah, I founded playerprofiler.com, which is all about advanced stats and metrics. But when I think about building an NFL team, I think about it like building a team of gladiators. Like, who would you want to start with, right? You'd want to start with the meanest edge rusher who is going to create the most havoc in the backfield, and then the ultimate left tackle, right?
Yeah.
The Orlando Pace type left tackle. How do you find those guys? And then once you have those guys, then you can start to build in concentric circles out to the perimeter. And then finally, once you have, you get an elite corner, get an alpha receiver, drop in the quarterback, and go win.
Yeah. And I mean, it's why so many of these teams following that blueprint have won, right? You look at Denver is another great example. Denver started winning when they dropped Bo Nix in there, but it wasn't really Bo Nix that made the difference as much as it was their offensive and defensive lines are excellent. Yeah. Denver's defense is one of the best in the league.
I mean, no GM has an excuse anymore. Like, Detroit set everything in motion. Like, go back and you can look at all their transactions. Their transaction history is public. Mm-hmm. You can go see every single one, how they did it. You know, trading players for picks, trading down, investing at the point of attack, and then building out. It's all right there. Amon-Ra wasn't even an early round pick. Amon-Ra was a 4th round pick.
Mm-hmm. And their number one pick, the guy that they did invest big draft capital in at wide receiver, when they ask him to do the one thing that he does, he's great at doing it. You know, even if you view that as a wasted pick, even if that's quote unquote wasted capital,
right?
They have one of the best field stretchers in the league in Jamison Williams out of that pick, and you can see the difference it makes when he's out there versus when he's not. I think when you look at the Lions specifically as a roster, when you look at the Commanders, you know, you see some of these teams, the Rams can be thrown in there too, in terms of how quickly they rebuilt a defense that needed a lot of infusion of youth and required a lot of draft capital. I think a lot of it can basically be boiled down to two things. One, if you're an offensive lineman, are you just fucking mean? Do you hate the opposition more than you love yourself? How badly do you want to plant someone on their ass? And if you're a defensive lineman, right, do you have that same mentality about, I'm not here, I'm hunting quarterbacks, but also I just want to put someone on their ass? And if your O-lineman and your D-lineman have that attitude, it starts to permeate through your whole team. And obviously, you know, we know what position Dan Campbell played. And obviously how that impacts the team. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, you're looking at it. That's what attitude looks like. And that's what total buy-in looks like. So when you're looking at rosters and you give Brad Holmes his flowers for the way that he's built the Detroit Lions, a lot of it has to be attributed to the way that he allocated the resources that Detroit had. And I think that, you know, going forward, people are going to take pages from that and say, hey, tackle is of priority, edge is of priority, and then interior offensive and defensive linemen, which again, you're going to get at a discount in this draft because every other position teams are going to draft for need, and you're going to find really good interior offensive and defensive linemen available at pick 65 and 70 that shouldn't be there. If your goal is just build out your roster, if you have the luxury of not needing anything, draft those guys and prosper.
Yeah, and Jeff is Rad. By the way, Jeff is Rad is on FastDraft, and Jeff is Rad was an innovator. Jeff is Rad knows that if anyone uses his username as their promo code to get a $25 deposit match on FastDraft, that he will also get a $25 promo fund deposit in his wallet. And so he changed his username in the chat to promo code Jeff is Rad. So you could use promo code Podfather if you want, but I think you should use promo code Jeff is Rad because then Jeff also gets 25 to play with. And our Flex 4 game is live. So if you like drafting, you could just draft 6 guys and every week top 4 into your lineup. It is the fastest, simplest, most fun way to play best ball in the universe is on FastDraft with the Flex 4 game. The Origins rookie game is about to launch. It's launching very soon. So get the FastDraft app. Go download it in the App Store on Google Play. Also, I am on a mission to get 100 reviews. You've reviewed the app, Anand.
Mm-hmm.
If you do like FastDraft, if you have it, then review it, because there were some buzzards on Twitter X telling me that until FastDraft has 100 reviews, they're not going to take it seriously. And it was one of those things where I was upset. I was triggered. But then at the same time, I was like, well, they have a point. 100 reviews would make the app a little bit more legitimate. So you should probably encourage people to review the app. You merely haven't brought it up. Those apps don't just get reviewed on their own. People have to encourage, a little bit, or like you're using the app and then the pop-up comes up. Are you liking this app? We don't have that. We're not bothering you with that. I'm bothering you on the podcast instead. And yeah, Flex 4, super fun. Origins, the rookie game, going to be super fun. And his question is, how can I leverage this information to improve in best ball? I would say there are certain teams that we know, like Detroit, that are not going to be drafting a running back, right? And think about the teams around the league that have 2 quality running backs on the roster already. They used early round capital on one recently. They signed one to a contract recently, or they have a super productive current back on the roster. Think about the Rams. That's safe. Like in early drafts, you can draft Blake Corum and not be worried that he's not actually going to be the handcuff. Because a lot of times what happens is you're drafting in best ball in March, and the guy you thought that would be the handcuff isn't the handcuff. So you thought, oh, this backup running back, he has some real juice, and then he gets nerfed by the NFL draft. Go down the rosters and see which backfields are safe, because it's weak at a lot of positions except running back, which is going to mean it's possible, according to Theo, 3 running backs go in the first round. And if that happens, there's a lot of backfields that are at risk. Like in Washington, Brian Robinson is at risk. Think about if you're comparing Detroit and Washington, this is the year when Detroit picked Gibbs.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's obviously a part of it. I think when you look at kind of where the strength in a draft lies, is a big part of this too, right? If you have a tight end that's just a guy that could potentially be replaced by one of these rookie tight ends, I think that's something that I'd look at as well. Potentially fading the tight ends that are just there to be there. Running backs that are just kind of placeholders as opposed to guys that might make a difference. Great example, Dallas. I think the worst kept secret in the world is that Ashton Jeanty to Dallas would be a lot of fun. There's a big reason for that. It's not just that, Ashton Jeanty's awesome. It's worked out for Jerry before. Ezekiel Elliott worked out for him. And we know that he likes to go back to things that have worked for him specifically, even if we think groupthink has kind of advanced past where he's been. So situations like that I would avoid. But the other one too is just, if you're obviously we want to score fantasy points. Fantasy points are scored by good offenses, and good offenses have good offensive lines. So when you kind of look into it and ask yourself, what offensive lines do we think are kind of underrated? Last year would have been Washington. In SFB, I was heavy on Washington this year. I had Daniels, McLaurin, and B-Rob. That was a big part of the reason. It was the offensive line and the investment that they had made there. So it's kind of how good is our O-line, and do you trust the quarterback? That's kind of where your running back tight ends gain more value, or your wide receivers gain more value.
Theo has Ashton Jeanty going at pick 10 to the Chicago Bears. and that makes perfect sense. The case for DeAndre Swift is he's in a great situation with an improving offense, better offensive coordinator, Caleb Williams taking a step up, improvements on the offensive line are a certainty. I would say that's the case for DJ Moore. That's a great case for Rome Odunze. That's not the case to be made for DeAndre Swift, because DeAndre Swift is very vulnerable to being usurped by a first or second round running back, because he did not show that he is a super efficient player. His efficiency's been in decline since he entered the NFL. So like Brian Robinson, DeAndre Swift, there's a number of running backs when you look at these rosters that are vulnerable because they weren't super efficient. They have scored fantasy points with unsustainable efficiency in the passing game, like Brian Robinson did a couple of years ago, unsustainable touchdown rates. Those types of running backs are the ones to fade particularly hard before the NFL draft, just in case. The problem is NFL GMs are capable of some pretty crazy things where you're thinking, this backfield is set. You're good. And then, no, they just can't get away from a particular running back. It makes no sense. However, I do believe, like the Rams backfield, given that Corum was a third-round pick, given that he was, a star player for a national championship team, that he has an all-purpose skill set, Kyren Williams was so good, it's impossible for me to see the Rams using early capital on a running back. I just don't see it. However, Buffalo? You might think, Ray Davis, he stepped up. James Cook looks great. Like that, Buffalo would be the type of team that I could see surprising people who think that backfield's set. And they're like, no. We want to upgrade from Ty Johnson. We like Davis and we like Cook, but we're thinking about upgrading from Ty Johnson with a running back in the second round. And it's like, what? So that is, drafting handcuff running backs in before the NFL draft is so fraught in best ball. Now, we did promise people that we would talk about NFL free agency. It is interesting when you look at who the free agents are. The top free agent, according to ESPN, in Detroit is
Kevin Zeitler.
Yes, Kevin Zeitler. I was looking for the drum roll sound effect and I could not find it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, again, rich get richer, right? The Lions roster is so good that, even if you lose a Kevin Zeitler, they're probably still going to get a really productive guard at like pick 80 in this draft because it's the Lions and that's what they do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But,
this is the point. This is the point. Kevin Zeitler's 34 years old. Kevin Zeitler is on a 1-year deal. If you're at risk of losing 34-year-old coming off a 1-year deal, then your roster construction is damn near perfect. It's when you're losing a quality player, then there's probably a deal that could have been made a year or two ago that you didn't make, and now you're in a position where you're going to lose him. That's the difference.
It's tough because so many of these guys, right? You love continuity. You love, leaders in the locker room. Obviously, aging veterans are exactly that. But when you have the ability to draft the way that the Lions have the ability to draft now, because they can just keep taking best player available basically into infinity. And ironically enough, between, their second and third round picks, one of them is probably going to be a smaller school guard that turns out to be something. I would love for it to be one of the guys from the Senior Bowl so that we can talk about how cool it was to have seen them. And now, along with Dan Campbell's Glass Eaters, he's a Super Bowl champion eventually, we hope. We can hope. But yeah, I mean, they're in perfect position to replace someone like Kevin Zeitler, which is crazy to say because he's a pretty high commodity, like all pro caliber guards. Tough to find, man.
So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this in a little more detail. The AFC North seems to have the best free agents available. You've got Ronnie Stanley. So anytime you have a
Spend up.
highly rated offensive lineman, that's a great stat. Jamison Hensley wrote him up for ESPN. He was 12th in pass block win rate, 92.5%. But when you have Lamar Jackson, it's less of a need position because he has the escapability that most quarterbacks don't. So you can put a little bit lower premium on the left tackle position and then invest a little bit more on the interior offensive line when you have a mobile quarterback. So that's an interesting element of sort of how you would construct an offensive line and where you would devote your funds. We called it before anybody that T. Higgins was never going to re-sign in Cincinnati to a long-term extension. They just don't have the money. They need to put all that money in escrow to pay Burrow and Chase and Higgins, and even if they can make it under the salary cap, it's just not going to happen. That's just not how the Bengals do business. It doesn't even make sense. Like, their defense now has so many issues that it has been exposed that they had to try to rebuild that unit on the fly unsuccessfully. There was no way Higgins could come back now because they know they have to focus on investing in the defense.
I mean, Ben Baby did a great write-up on this. Strong recommendation that you check him out if you're looking for Bengals stuff. But, I mean, it looks like they're going to attempt to make it work. But, again, the last trio to make as much as they're going to make in terms of a percentage of the salary cap, it's been done one time, and it was the Colts with Peyton, Marvin, and Reggie way back in the day. That's kind of the only blueprint on how to build a roster with that much allocated to a quarterback and two wide receivers. And you run the risk of making a bad defense worse, right? I mean, you're going to have to give up a whole lot of flexibility on your roster because you have to now hit on those draft picks like the Rams did a couple years ago. And like when New Orleans was going all in towards the end of the Breeze era. You do have to hit on those draft picks. Otherwise, that window shuts as quickly as it opened. So it's tough. I still think that ultimately Higgins will be somewhere else. But, they're trying to make it work. So, I mean, it would be really interesting just from the nerd side on my end to see how a roster would be constructed with those three salaries on your books. But, again, Cincinnati – cash-strapped is putting it gently in terms of Stan Kroenke writing checks to whoever and, some of the other owners. I don't think Stephen Ross is hurting for dollars. Jerry Jones probably not hurting for money. But the
Higgins wants
Bengals
to
are
go
not
out there and get wined and dined and sign a huge contract. That's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to stay in Cincinnati and be the beta to Jamar Chase's alpha. That's no. He sees himself as an alpha. He wants to go somewhere and be the alpha. Now,
Bryce
in Cleveland, we're talking about Nick Chubb. He's a shell of his former self, but still a big name player, brand name player. He's probably going to leave coming off injury, another injury. Jerome Ford, top 5 in yards created per touch, number 7 in yards per touch, number 12 in juke rate, evaded tackles per touch on playerprofiler.com. Had an incredibly efficient season, had a productive season the year prior. So even if the Browns go out and draft a running back, and it's likely they won't in the first round because they have such an early pick, so now the highest the Browns could draft a running back is the second round, and this team does have a lot of needs, right? They have the first pick in the second round. That's a pick that I think a lot of people are circling as a potential running back. If they don't select a running back, all you have to do is fade a running back with pick 33, and Jerome Ford accrues huge value in all these early best ball drafts.
Yeah, and I mean it's once you get past Jeanty, right? your RB4 and RB8 in this class aren't going to be drastically dissimilar. And so for that reason, if you're not going to grab a premier running back, you have your Ohio State duo and Judkins and Henderson. You've got several other players that we've gone through earlier that are interesting at running back. But if you're the Browns, you just have more pressing needs than a running back at the top of round 2. And I know that that's where they took Nick Chubb, and he turned out to be awesome. And, for their sake, I hope that they get him back because that city loves that kid. But to me, I think, it's a little too rich for my blood there. That's a luxury you have when you're the Lions. It's not one you can afford if you're the Browns.
I see Kansas City going running back at either pick 63 or pick 66. So that is going to be bad news for Isaiah Pacheco. But finally, we have 2 free agents, dueling free agents in Pittsburgh, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. How do you think the quarterback position gets solved in Pittsburgh?
I think it's pretty clear that neither of those two are the long-term answer. In the interim, if I'm Pittsburgh and they're a smart front office, I still can't believe that the whole Kenny Pickett thing went down the way that it did. I thought that was a bad pick at the time.
Hometown kid,
and they got to see him.
Rarely works out.
I mean,
except Aiden Hutchinson worked out. Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, but Aiden Hutchinson was the best player in that draft.
That was one of the rare hometown kid exceptions.
Yeah. I think when you look at all of the ways that they could go, I think it makes the most sense to try and retain both of them if they can. And, do exactly what they did this year, which is basically start Russell Wilson as long as he's healthy and available. And then Justin Fields is there in relief. But 2026, you have to aggressively attack quarterback if you're Pittsburgh.
So you think they're going to re-sign both these guys?
That's what I would do. Because I don't think that anybody is rushing to give either of them starting jobs elsewhere for the money that you'd have to pay them. And so, to me, I would just basically kick that can down the road one more year, knowing that 2026 projects to be a much better quarterback class than this one even. And then the early returns on 2027, if you haven't watched him yet, there is a quarterback at Florida, true freshman this year. His name is DJ Lagway. That's the next one that you're going to hear, kind of like Arch Manning in this 26 class and so on and so forth. There's always one that you hear about long before the others. He's the one. So DJ Lagway in 2027, if you need somebody, I have a feeling Arch Manning is going to be that guy in 2026. But again, this draft class for QB is just not good enough for me to put my eggs in any of these baskets. I'm not all in on a Shedeur. I'm not all in on a Cam. I'm not all in on a Will Howard or Ewers or any of these other guys. I think that your best case scenario here is basically just throw a dart at someone that you like some traits on in round 4, round 5, round 6. There are not quarterbacks where they're going to go in the first 3 rounds of this draft that I'd feel comfortable with. And so if I'm Pittsburgh, I'm willing to pay a little bit extra to keep Fields and Russ there for one more year. Hopefully you get some kind of separation between the two, because that dynamic was just weird all year in terms of, will Russ play? Will he not play? Is it Justin's team? Is it Russ's team? Let that play out for one more year. Choose the better of the two options. My thought is at some point, the wheels on the Russ bus are going to fall off. He's just taking too many hits. Again, he's not the biggest dude. And you kind of would ride with Fields as your backup or quote unquote bridge into somebody else. But you've got to kind of keep Russ there as long as you can, because I don't think Justin's ready to fully run that offense yet. And there's a lot of unlearning to do from all the shit that the Bears put him through.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the host, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.